State Senator L. Scott Frantz is in his 5th term in the Connecticut Senate, where he represents the 36th senatorial district, which includes the communities of Greenwich, New Canaan, and Stamford. He has served since 2009. Senator Frantz has been named the Deputy Senate Republican Majority Leader of the Republican Caucus. He also serves as the co-chair of the Commerce Committee and the Finance, Revenue, and Bonding Committee. Senator Frantz also serves as the Vice Chair of the Government Administration and Elections Committee. In addition to all of these leadership roles, he is also a member of the Transportation Committee. As the Senate Republican co-chair of the Commerce and Finance Committees, Senator Frantz continues to contribute to ongoing efforts to help Connecticut businesses succeed, protect jobs, promote employment, and balance state budgets. Getting Connecticut's fiscal house in order remains one of his largest priorities. Senator Frantz is a business entrepreneur with a long history of service and a commitment to his community. Some of his positions he has held in the past include Chairman of the Connecticut Development Authority, Chairman of the Board of Directors of Bradley International Airport, and Chairman of the Connecticut Brownsfield Redevelopment Authority. In addition to all these, Senator Frantz has held many other positions and has received numerous accolades for his civic work, but unfortunately, I don't have enough time to tell you about all of them, as there are so many. Finally, Senator Frantz is a graduate of the Hotchkiss School, Princeton University, and Dartmouth's Tuck School of Business. He currently resides in Riverside with his wife and 4 children, 2 of which, Hanley and Hunter, are Taft alumni. Please join me in warmly welcoming Senator Frantz.
Thank you very much, Colin. I appreciate that. And good morning, Taft. You all look terrific. How are you? Good. Good. Thank you so much for the invitation to come and talk to you today for a little bit, and hopefully we can do some Q&A afterwards in the faculty room just down the hallway. And I got to tell you, the timing couldn't have been better to come and do this today, because just a couple days ago, Quinnipiac put out their poll results in terms of what the public approval rating was for the General Assembly, meaning the State Senate and the State House in Connecticut. And I'm proud to announce today that we jumped from a 14% approval rating to 15.2%. You know, maybe Mark Twain, another great Connecticut resident and author 100 and some odd years ago, was right when he said, "No man's farm, family, or business is safe when the legislature is in session." There is a little bit of truth to that, as we had our opening day yesterday. But, you know, I like to think of that 14 to 15.2% jump as a 6% increase as opposed to just a 1.2% increase. It's amazing because collectively we're not loved, but individually the legislators who hold seats up there have an 85% chance of getting reelected if they want to. So they like their own person, but they don't like the body as a whole. It's a pretty interesting situation. We'll get into that a little bit in a little bit. But you know, I will be making a pitch for all of you trying public service at some point. It doesn't have to be public office, but you know, Taft is all about serving others and serving the greater good. So I'll continue to make a pitch about. I have a little bit of a bias towards public office because it's a really great place that doesn't have enough really wonderful people involved in it. And you know, you guys are great people. This is a great institution, and I could see each and every one of you at some point in your futures making some room for public service. So I'll keep coming back to that as well. It's a really cool job because you in the State Senate can help people on a one-on-one individual basis. You have roughly 100,000 constituents in each of the Senate districts. And believe me, there are a lot of people in great need, whether it's financial need or health issues or domestic issues or whatever it is. You can actually help these people one-on-one, which is the most wonderful, rewarding part of the job. On top of that, you can influence policy we're roughly 3.5 million people here in the state of Connecticut. You can influence policy that's going to hopefully positively affect them, and that's a wonderful, wonderful feeling. And boy, does that make a difference over the course of time in terms of a state's health or where they rank versus other states. It's really all about political leadership, making sure that you get the right laws through and stop the really bad ideas from going through the legislative process. You end up being a bit of a psychologist in many cases. You end up being a coach, a cheerleader, you end up being a job finder. Sometimes you're just there to be company for people who are, in their 80s, they don't have too many friends left, and they just want to talk to someone. So, and you have to take their phone call or have a cup of coffee with them, and so you do that. But that's a wonderful aspect of the job as well. So, and don't do it if you don't like people. You got to like people if you're going to get into the world of politics and public service. And again, Taft is really trying to turn all of you into leaders in one way or another, and I think this is an area that you should continue to look at. Let me see a show of hands of all the people who were born in Connecticut or spent a significant amount of time in Connecticut before coming to Taft. You're all technically Connecticut residents. Okay, that's good. We got a fair number here. Connecticut, I'm going to tell you what is happening in Connecticut. I'm not going to sugarcoat anything. There are a lot of public office holders who run around sugarcoating things, telling you that everything is great. Vote for me again, and I will continue to keep things great within the state of Connecticut, for example, when things are really not that great. I think it's much more honest to let people know, folks know, especially constituents and voters, what the condition of your state is, what you have done individually correctly and what you've done incorrectly. So I'll be giving you some statistics that are a little bit sobering, and that is that Connecticut pretty much, which used to be ranked number 1, 2, and 3 in all of the important categories, places to live, places to raise a family, places to start a business, places to get educated, and so on and so forth, has dropped to 46, 47, 48, 49, and 50 in just about 25 years. Hartford used to be, and Bridgeport too, believe it or not, used to be, on a per capita basis, the wealthiest 2 cities in the country in the late 1800s for about 5 or 6 years, something like that. So something, has gone wrong. And to start to begin to explain that, it's not good when you have a partisan divide. It's much better to come together collectively to solve problems, whether they're legislative issue problems or whatever it might be, buying into working together as a group, not against each other, but as a group. That's how you come up with really good solutions. And I think that the problem in Connecticut is that for 2.5, maybe 3 generations now, there's been majority party rule by one party, and that's never good, whether it's Republican, Democrat, or whatever party you want to pick. So that's kind of led us down this path, which is not so good for the future and certainly the current state of Connecticut, and we're there to change that. So something amazing happened in the last election, and that is that we were able to tie in the Senate. So 18 Republicans, 18 Democrats, whereas before we were in the superminority or the minority. Being in the superminority is not fun. Keep this in mind. It's like having 5 older brothers who are linebackers, and every day they want to just pound the daylights out of you, which is what they would do every day up in Hartford when we were in session. It's not fun. But we were able to get to a point where we're tied, 18 to 18. It hasn't happened since 1893. They didn't really know what to make of it, and we didn't either. But what we did was we tried to negotiate with them, and the majority party said, no, nothing's changed. We're still the majority party because the lieutenant governor is the person who breaks tie votes. And so we're still the majority. And so we said, okay, we'll see it in the Supreme Court because we don't read the Constitution that way. There's nothing in the Constitution that says anything about how you pick your leaders, and leaders are important because those are the folks who set the rules for the Senate for that particular upcoming session. And on the last step of the Supreme Court, before actually filing this lawsuit, we got the phone call and said, let's sit down and talk. So there's a power-sharing agreement between the Democrats and the Republicans, which has actually worked out very, very well. And we've been able to exert some influence, a lot more influence than we have in the past, especially on the budgetary issues, the fiscal issues, and the all-important budget itself. So we were able to, in a very bipartisan fashion this last year, pass a budget. It took 9 months longer than expected, and it went through a veto process. We had to override the veto. The governor didn't like it, but the vast majority of members of the Senate and the House liked it very much. So we overrode that veto, and we have a budget that actually does something great for the future. And any of you who are thinking about sticking around in Connecticut, we encourage you to do that. You will have a much brighter fiscal future to look forward to. The budget calls for there to be a spending cap. It's the whole concept of not spending more money than you have. You all grew up with that, basically, right? But it's common sense that's not used in the Capitol. In 1992, when the income tax was first implemented in the state, the voters called out for some sort of a check and a balance in the system. So they said a constitutional spending cap went out for a referendum. 85% plus voted for it, but it was never implemented because there are always loopholes in legal language that was written by the majority party so that they would never be able to implement this thing. This new budget does exactly that. It also caps our bonding. So when the state needs money, which is almost daily nowadays, they go to the markets and they sell bonds, take the proceeds, and use it for projects, but they also use it for general fund expenses. And we put a cap on bonding. It's gone from $18 billion to $23.6 billion here in the last 7 years. It's an inexcusable, unsustainable increase. So that is something that's very important. Also, labor contracts. In the past, it was a discussion between the executive branch, the governor's office, and the unions as to what the contracts would be, typically long-term, 5 to 7 years. Now the legislature has to vote on it. The House and the Senate have to vote on these contracts, which is a huge step in the right direction because that cost component, which is considered a fixed part of the budget, is growing at an astronomical rate, which is completely unaffordable. So how did this all happen? Just very briefly, we just have a real tough time over the last 25 years balancing a budget, even with this new income tax and these extra revenues coming in, because the cost part of the equation is, all you mathematicians out there know that the most powerful force in the universe is compounding, right? So you have a cost structure that's doing this. You get into the hockey stick part of things here, and you have a flat to no population growth situation here, and you have personal income growth of this versus this. It's simply unaffordable. So that's why we end up having such a tough time balancing budgets. We had to go through 8 different iterations of this budget just this last year, and it's painful and it takes a lot of time, and it's not good for the fiscal health of the state. And the mentality up there is slowly changing, but because they're so desperate for revenues, they do things like they issue bonds at a premium. So ordinarily you'd pay 2.5% on a 10-year, 15-year bond, but they take it up to 3.5% because it's Connecticut, it's riskier. And then the treasurer says, well, why don't we take it up to 5.5% or 6%, and we'll take some money up front, and we will we'll use that for general fund expenses. And it just ends up costing all of us and you ultimately much more money down the road. Rainy day fund is an account that's supposed to be there for exactly that, a rainy day budget reserve fund. And whatever money's gone in there, and there have been billions in there before because they do raise taxes regularly, and you do have a surplus and it goes in there, but it has essentially been spent. Up until recently, where you've all read about the federal tax changes, and what's happened there is that because there were a lot of people who had money compounding, earning more money abroad, and there was a chance to repatriate at favorable tax rates, there was a big sort of windfall for Connecticut. So there's another $650 million that will go into the budget reserve fund. Anybody want to guess what's going to happen to it within the next year? Going to get spent. You got it. We're already looking at least a $300 million deficit for this fiscal year, and there's no way to raise the money otherwise. So that's unfortunately what they're going to be looking at. So the victims of this fiscal problem that we're having are the people who need it the most. I mean, these structural expenses, debt service, the union contractual obligations, et cetera, are growing at this unsustainable rate. And what's happening is it's crowding out the spending for those who desperately need it. People who need the social service assistance, people who need the financial assistance, the education, the younger education in particular is being hurt by this. Older folks, we just went through another iteration with the Medicaid savings plan, $54 million. We have a $20 billion a year budget. $54 million is a very small amount, but they're so desperate for every nickel and dime that they cut that $54 million, which flipped out the seniors, and we had an absolute obligation to get back together again and put that money back into place. We got to stop scaring our seniors and stop defunding them. And the governor vetoed it. We couldn't believe it. He's in his last term here, by the way, and he's a little angry about things. So he vetoed it. So we had to go back up. Costs about $14,000 a day to open up the Capitol when you're not in session and vote on an override veto like that. So, we don't really have that kind of money, but the governor did it anyway. So one of the most virtuous industries known to mankind is the hospital industry, right? Healthcare delivery, right? So Connecticut, in its infinite wisdom about 4 years ago, decided that they were going to start taxing hospitals. And so they put this tax in place, which every year is about $550 to $650 million. It's going to be more this year. And, so it's neat. When you get to be co-chair of the Finance Committee, you get to ask questions of all the witnesses that you invite to come to your hearings. And one of them was the head of the Finance Department, the Budget Department, a guy named Ben Barnes. And so I said, Mr. Secretary, what are you thinking when it comes to thinking about taxing hospitals, most virtuous industry known to mankind? What are you doing? And he looked at me straight in the eye and he said, why do bank robbers go to banks? It's where the money is. That's the kind of mentality that we've been dealing with up there. So there needs to be a lot of work done here, and some of the other crazy proposed taxes are the following. Business activity tax. Because you're in business and you're making $1 in revenue, they're going to tax you on the fact that you're active. Mileage tax. Any of you who drove in today as a day student or a faculty member, they tax you somewhere between 5 and 20 cents a mile on the back roads, any road, tax you on your driveway even. Statewide real estate tax. So the way it works now is you pay to your local town or city. Local real estate taxes pays for education and a few other things. State wanted to put another tax on all the homes across this state, and the money would go to Hartford, not to the cities and the towns. Mansion tax. Any home that's worth over $300,000 is going to be taxed at some astronomical rate. They wanted to implement an endowment earnings tax, specifically focusing on Yale, maybe even a place like Taft, because it's such an extraordinary place. Nonprofit real estate tax. They wanted to start taxing churches, synagogues, schools on their real estate. The state's become very reliant on legal settlements. So when Volkswagen had their emissions scandal, Connecticut made out with $40 million worth of settlement. When UBS had their subprime mortgage settlement, we got about $80 million, and they've started to budget for those things in Connecticut. So anyway, you guys get the idea. It's a mess here in Connecticut, but we have hit an inflection point thanks to this bipartisan work on the budget. And it's going to take some time to recover, but here's how we're going to do that. First and foremost, the budget I was telling you about is going to make all the difference. And what we need to do, in addition to that, which is fixing our balance sheet and fixing our prospects on the fiscal end of things, while keeping everything else stable, funding as many things as we possibly can at 100% of where we have been in the past. But we need to make sure that Connecticut people and legislators understand that pro-growth is really the way to go. You can't have an economy that is not allowed to grow, because it's not going to grow if you tax it too much. If you regulate it too much, it's just not going to happen. And that makes it pretty dismal for everybody, ultimately, long term. And right now, looking at the state of Connecticut, looking at how many people all across the economic spectrum, all the way from lower middle class to upper class, who have left the state, it's horrible, because the economy suffers as a result. Worst performing economy in the Northeast. We've only recovered 76% of our jobs from the beginning of the Great Recession, while Massachusetts, our neighbor, and virtually geographically the exact same thing that we are, has recovered 300%. Maine and New Hampshire, 186%. Vermont, probably about the same, I think, something like that. So we need to understand that growth is the answer, and it's going to be, a boon for any of you that stick around in Connecticut if we do get our act together, because there will be great jobs available for you, whether you're going into the private sector, going into social services, nonprofits, whatever the case might be. So there are a lot of suggestions, a lot of specific suggestions, which I won't bore you with today. But we need to do things like lower taxes. We need to get rid of estate taxes and gift taxes, where we really stand out in the context of the entire nation. Our pension system is totally underfunded. It's about 28%, according to my back-of-the-envelope calculations. According to the actuarials, it's maybe 33% funded. If you're less than 66% funded, there ain't no way you're going to catch up. And so we have some people in their late 50s who are retirees of the state, who are now making $300,000 a year, plus about $30,000, $40,000 worth of health care benefits. Math simply doesn't work. So that's Connecticut, and we're working on it. It's going to get fixed. It's just going to take a little bit longer than we thought. And so any of you planning on sticking around, you will have blue skies to look forward to. Nationally, because we're almost out of time here, I just want to run over what I think, in my judgment, is going on. But, democracy is a great system. Not always, but it's the best one in the world when you compare it to just about any other form of government out there in the world. And the consensus this last go-around a year ago, last November, was the consensus by 100% of the people is that 50% of the people in this country had lost their mind, right? I mean, didn't we all kind of think the same thing too? And American politics can produce interesting results, and sometimes completely shocking results, perverted results, and fill in the blank, whatever you want to call that last election result. But I could start to see, personally, where this impetus was coming from. And if you look at the electoral system and you look at the concentration of the different campaigns, both good and bad, on those early electoral states, and you started to listen to the people in those states, especially middle-class blue-collar workers, there was a great sense of anger that I didn't really know existed. Obviously, there are a lot of people angry out there, but I didn't know it existed to this high level. And it started to come together to indicate to me anyway that, wow, this guy Trump might actually do better than we think in some of these states. Had no idea he was going to pull that victory off, but he did. And so, in this last election, the political pendulum swung. It's alive and well. It swung. It's just we didn't know it was going to hit something and kind of go off to the right a little bit here and end up where it did. So I've never met the president. I don't know him, obviously. I don't plan on meeting him anytime soon, and I'm not sure really what to make of him. I mean, the world's miffed. Some are scared. Some are, pessimistic. I tend to, in situations like this, I tend to want to look at the positive because, if you're an optimist, that's basically a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you go into situations, your work, your classes, your athletic competitions, being an optimist, your life will work out great. So, I think it's really important that what we all do is look at, we're 13 months into this 4-year term, is not so much look at the man who definitely bloviates too much. He gets himself into trouble, definitely tweets too much, makes people nervous, gets them crazy and everything else. But if you look at the numbers after these 13 months, which have gone pretty quickly, and you look at the economy, it's, in my judgment, back of the envelope again, is growing at 3.5%. They say 2.9%, but it's a huge increase. And unemployment is at its lowest level in 20 plus years. African American unemployment lowest in 26 years, I think it is. You look at some of these, the tax reform bill, whether you like the look of it or not, it's actually working. A lot of companies are giving out these wonderful bonuses to people who haven't had bonuses for a long time. They're giving raises. Walmart, of all companies, has promised to start paying people $15 an hour as a minimum wage, which means the average wage is going to go up to probably $19 or $20, which is great. It gets the free market system working. It works, right? It really does. I know none of you are going to work at Walmart, but it's something to get excited about. He's always looking for the deal, right? And so he says we're going to scratch that North American Free Trade Agreement. We're going to lose it. It's just a bad deal for America, and we're going to lose it. But what he's doing really is he's negotiating for better terms, and he's getting them already. So stay tuned on that. Look at these numbers and circumstances, and again, and also internationally, by being brash and being obnoxious and unpredictable, there's, I think, more stability in the North Korean situation and possibly the Iranian situation today than there was a couple of years ago, because of this unpredictability, and they can't figure him out. They don't want to test him too much. So if you think about everything except common decency, respect for other people, respect for the highest office in the nation, guy's actually he's doing an okay job. And so I would encourage you once again, look at the positive end of things. bring that optimism and that, you know, passion that you all have for whatever you like to do in life. Bring it with you wherever you go. And when you get into a job or when you get into a public office that you earn later in life or volunteer position or whatever, bring that sense of optimism, that passion with you, and you will end up making a huge difference. You'll sleep well at night because you're going to work hard and because you know you're doing the right thing in the Taft tradition. And I wish you the best of luck. Just be careful with your tweets. Thank you.